Staying one step ahead of your students. It can be terrifying to teach a topic that you are not trained to teach. Many CBI teachers find themselves in this situation, where they themselves do not yet know everything that the students need to learn in the course. In an ideal world, you would have the time to master all of the materials before the course ever begins. But there's a good chance that that will be far from the case. Still, somehow you need to be at least one step ahead of your students. Here are some ideas for how to do that. Understanding the course. Review materials from other classes that cover the same subject and level. Syllabi and tests from similar classes can help you get a big picture. You can look for these in places where you find open educational resources. You will find additional related materials by searching for key terms on the internet. Talk to a content expert or someone who has taught the subject before. Ask them for tips and ask them where students usually have their greatest difficulty and will most need your help. Be at least one chapter or unit ahead of the class. This will help you understand how the concepts from the current lesson relate to things that are coming. Very often, concepts build upon other concepts. So if you have a sense of where you are heading when you get to Unit 4, this can help you teach Unit 3 better. Be sure not to skip over any part of the readings that you assign to your students. Establish your authority. How a person establishes his or her authority is both highly cultural and highly personal, so it is hard to give general advice. However, all teachers must establish their authority in their classes. If they do not, the students will not respect them. If the students do not respect the teacher, they will not follow the teacher's rules. Under these conditions, class activities will not work properly. Saying that you need to establish your authority is not at all to say that you should misrepresent yourself to your students. For example, by being entirely dishonest about how much of an expert you are on the content matter. Nor that you should act like a dictator in the classroom. It is entirely possible to be welcoming and kind to the students while also having a firmly established level of authority. Set the tone early. It is easier to go from a stricter relationship to a friendlier relationship. If you start out too familiar with your students or too loose with the rules, it will be impossible to impose stricter rules later on. Use a good teacher voice. Find a way to project your voice without straining your voice or sounding like you are shouting. In order to do this, you need to breathe from the region of your stomach, not from the region of your throat. If you do not use a strong teacher voice, you will not project authority. Besides that, if your voice is too quiet, your students will have a hard time understanding you. And it's already hard to understand something in an L2. Do not feel like you need to know and remember everything. On the language side, even native speakers forget common words at certain moments. On the content side, think, for example, about how math teachers so often ask their students to do simple arithmetic for them while they're explaining something more advanced. A person can be an expert without remembering everything all the time. Do not demand that of yourself, especially when you are teaching a new subject. Students will ask you questions you do not know the answer to. What do you do in this situation? You should not invent an answer. There are several possible responses that are better. Which option you choose will depend in part on whether it is A, a question you cannot answer off the top of your head but could figure out, or B, a question that you have definitely never known the answer to. If the case is A, then you can stall for time by asking the student who asked the question, or other students, what they think. That's an excellent question, Carabo. What do you think the answer is? You can also take advantage of the moment to teach your students learner strategies. If a student asks a question that you feel you could answer with enough preparation time, do not feel that you need to answer right away. Answering right away may lead to error. What you can do instead is to walk your students through the solution. Let's go back to page 53 and see how they explain it. Then you can call attention to the information in your materials that explain what it is you need to do. By going step by step through the problem-solving process and explaining to your students as you go along, or perhaps you also get a lot of input from your students, you can model for them how a person can work on these problems on his or her own. If done with the proper attitude, this can empower students by showing them how to resolve questions on their own for future use. For questions that you really know nothing about, hopefully they are not basic questions in the lesson. It is okay to tell students sometimes, "That's a great question. I think I know the answer, but I'd like to make 100% sure that I'm giving you an accurate answer. So let me look into it and I'll get back to you, okay?" In this way, you show them that no one knows everything, but there are ways to find things out, and learning is a lifelong experience. There are some advantages that you offer to your students. Think about how being a non-native English speaker can sometimes make you a better and more understanding guide or model for your students, as compared to a native English speaker who has never had to learn English. In the same way, someone who is not a content expert can often understand the struggles of their students better than someone who's an expert in the area. You will have a more realistic understanding of how much time your students need in order to work on a problem or task, and how many steps they will need to follow. You are also unlikely to express your ideas in overly technical language. Conclusion. Don't forget, you are the authority in your class, and you can be an effective learning leader in your class. These are the references used for this text.